And Hungary has blocked $55 billion in aid for Ukraine just hours after an agreement was reached on starting membership talks. The aid blocking was announced by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán shortly after the EU leaders decided to open membership talks with Ukraine and Moldova and to grant candidate status to Georgia. President of the EU Council, Charles Michel, announced on X that it would open a session negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova and had granted candidate status to Georgia. The start of membership talks was hailed as a victory by the Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, with the EU leaders stating that the aid negotiations would resume early next year. Hungary, which maintains close ties with Russia, has long opposed a membership for Ukraine but didn't veto that move. Ukraine is critically dependent on EU and US funding as it continues to fight occupying Russian forces. I have joined me now to speak on this development, global affairs analyst Colin Senweke. Thank you for joining us this hour. We understand that all but one of the EU leaders had agreed on the aid package and also wider budget proposals for the bloc. Talk to us about how much of a threat you think Hungary's exception will be when negotiations resume in January.
Thank you, Nifemi, for having me. Well, I mean, what is actually playing out there is a sweet, bitter, feeling for Ukraine. On the one hand, essential talks have been formally opened, so it means that real negotiations towards joining the EU kickstarts. But on the other hand, they are faced with, an immediate existential problem, existential threat coming from Russia, and how to finance, defending Ukraine. And like you pointed out, the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, blocking that aid that is needed. Now, one point is clear. They are not running out of cash, out of resources this week or next week. It is estimated that, they still have something to pump them up till about summer, so 6 months away from now. But, the money, the 50 billion needed is critical. Just as the 61 billion expected from the US, that is also facing serious delay, is indeed critical, but they're not having it. However, it looks like European leaders are not giving up. They are actually confident that in the new year, immediately after the new year, when they reconvene, that there is hope that they will be able to untie the resources.
So if Hungary, which maintains close ties with Russia, can block a major aid to Ukraine, is it possible Russia holds more influence than the West is willing to admit?
Well, it's really difficult to put a finger at what exactly the motivation is here for Hungary, particularly under the leadership of Viktor Orbán in blocking this fund. Now, yes, it could be said that his close, alliance with Putin is a factor here. But at the same time, we are also looking at somebody with an extreme, right-wing political, ideological makeup. Right there in Hungary, there are quite, a lot of issues around, rule of law, anti-democratic tendencies, anti-gay rights issues, and so on and so forth, that have actually brought him in conflict with fellow Europeans, fellow members of the European Union. And so they have actually blocked some finances that are supposed to go to Hungary, requesting that he improves his records on rule of law and so on and so forth. So in a way, it could also be that Orbán is using this blockage as a way of strengthening his own negotiating powers, quite apart from, actually supporting doing this on behalf of Russia. So it's difficult, but in any case, what he is doing is no help to Russia, to Ukraine. It is help for Russia, and it is a very devastating one, except he turns around.
You talked about the bottleneck in the United States. Republicans are also holding back to pass additional aid for Ukraine. According to Joe Biden, Putin is counting on the Western countries to discontinue the financial support. We know what the odds are for Ukraine without aid from its two biggest donors. But is it right to say that perhaps the support is waning, and maybe, just maybe, the world is growing weary of the war in Ukraine and how long it's taking, and whether or not if Ukraine is actually making a headway after all the billions of dollars that have been donated thus far?
Well, no guarantees are there that even with all the help, financial help, logistical help and all of that Ukraine has gotten so far, both from the US and the EU, that they would win the war. There was no guarantee about that, but there is a guarantee that they will lose the war if they do not have the finances to, the resources to finance it. Now, whether this is, war fatigue or not remains to be seen. The signs are that it is not quite the case. I think this is basically politics playing out here. Go to the US, the issue at stake here is that they have their own domestic issues to worry about. They've only just barely averted a government shutdown. It is still knocking around the corner. It is not gone completely. So there is cash crunch there. Now, EU is dealing with, a member, a 27th member, who is, perceived to be on the side of Putin. So I do not necessarily think that there is some fatigue here, that they are tired, of the war and are finding an excuse out of it. No, I think, they are just dealing with some very nasty political realities, and, one can only hope that they get it off the way politically.
That matters a lot too, because it's going to be election year soon, and it will also matter how this money is spent and whether or not they're also being scrutinized to be sure that the monies are getting to where they really need them. Time will also tell if the $61 billion you talked about in U.S. defense aid package will pull through with the disagreement between Democrat and Republican lawmakers. But let's talk about EU's announcement on membership talks for Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky recently called that victory for all Europe. But is a European future feasible for Ukraine without first winning this war?
I don't think it's a matter of this or that. I think it's a matter of this and that. In terms of focusing on winning the war, which is rightfully a priority. And come to think of it, Nifemi, they have only just formally opened negotiations. There's a very, very long path to war. Now, between now and Ukraine becoming a full member of the EU, and therefore, beginning to enjoy the full benefit, we're looking at nothing less than, 10 years, and that's a very conservative estimate. But the fact that they have come this far is a very, very strategic victory for them. I mean, if they are negotiating with them, they are, already perceived to be, part of the same family, but then the nitty-gritty is what is then looked at. So that puts them at a different pedestal than when they are totally out of it. So yes, it's going to be, it's a good thing, but as a matter of fact, the priority remains winning the war, and Europe remains committed to helping them win the war.
Indeed, the path to EU membership is considered a long journey. You just put it at a decade. That's a very long time. You don't foresee Ukraine is still fighting the war for that long, do you?
Well, hopefully not. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball. But of course, if listen to the press conference that President Putin had a day or two ago, you could see his resolve. The guy has not shifted ground 1 inch. He has continued to talk about demilitarization. He's talked about denazification and so on and so forth. So it means that he wants to be the one and not Ukraine, a sovereign nation, to determine the size of his military. He's made claims, obnoxious claims, as some would say, of Nazi activities going on within the government of Ukraine. No. So these are things that people look at as trumped up, excuses to get into Ukraine and remain in Ukraine. And nobody will expect, Ukraine to cede its sovereignty or part of it to Russia. So what that tells you is that we're looking at a very, very long, drawn-out war that it will take another 10 years. It's unlikely, but I think it will be fully to rule it out.
Interesting days ahead, really. Development and global affairs analyst Colin Suweke live for us in Belgium. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Nifem, for having me. Have a nice